All right, so continuing on in this module about the contract, I actually want to show you the two different contracts that we like to use. One is actually a contract to purchase the property, and the other one is an option to actually purchase the property. Both of those are different. I already mentioned that in the prior module. I already mentioned that what we're doing about it in the prior module was more about identifying the dollar amount to offer, how we go about that. In this module, I want to talk about which of the two instruments should you be using. And that really goes down to the core of what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to do. Very simply said, the difference between an option and a contract is the following. Let's start with a contract. A contract is a commitment in writing by you to purchase a property from the seller for a certain amount of money at a certain date, at or before a certain date, called the close of escrow time period, a date, and for a certain amount of money, as I said already. That's the contract. So in the mind of the seller now basically sees, okay, this guy wants to buy my property. He's put a contract in place. The seller now expects you to purchase that property, and you have somewhat given a promise. Now, our contracts, very important, actually have a provision in there that allows you as the buyer to back out of the contract anytime for any reason. Now, why in the world can we use something like that? Well, very simply because we're dealing with people who no longer want their properties. We're not dealing with people that want to get the last dime out of it and want to lock you in and want to get a high escrow deposit. No, we're going to deal with people that are absolutely do not want their properties anymore. They have no more interest in these properties. They just want to get rid of these properties. They're willing to let them go for 10, 15, 20, 25 cents on the dollar, and they don't care about an escrow deposit. They just want to have the deal done. But still, a contract makes them feel they will sign this document even with a provision that you can back out of a contract, but a contract will make them feel that as if you promised to purchase it. The option, on the contrary, is just that. It's called an option. An option is an instrument where you basically say that you want to eventually purchase the property. You are given the right, you as the buyer or the optionee are being given the right to purchase the property, but you do not have the obligation to buy the property. So it's a right without having to buy it. Now on the contract side, you technically don't have to buy it either, because you can back out anytime for any reason. But the option is a more weaker, in a sense, document, not weaker from a legal point of view, but the promise is weaker. You're not saying to the seller, hey, Mr. Seller, when you use an option, you're not saying, hey, Mr. Seller, I will buy this property. You say, hey, Mr. Seller, I would like for you to give me the option to purchase this property for 6 months at a certain price point, and if I do not exercise my option, then after 6 months, the option will just dissolve and nothing will happen. That's an option. So the seller doesn't expect you to automatically buy that property. So here's this. In my business, I use mainly contracts. I use mainly contracts because I'm in a financial position to actually just go and buy the property, go on vacation, come back, and then go sell it. Many of the students, many of the people or students that invest in higher price property, they might be able to do that with smaller deals, but they're often not able to do that with really expensive deals. So if somebody comes across with a $400,000 property and you put it on a contract for $100,000, you might not have $100,000, or you might not be willing to put the $100,000 on the line for that property. And as a result, you can also use the option. Now, the option has become very, very popular over the last 7-8 years since the Land Profit Generator first came out with my students, for that exact reason, that with an option they can basically lock down a property and not have the obligation to buy it. Then they go market the property, sell it to somebody else, and then exercise their option. And so basically, in essence, they can, with an option, they lock down the property without having much of a promise made to the seller, and then go market the property. And if for any reason they do not find a buyer for it, which obviously in half a year is pretty unlikely, you should find a buyer much faster than that, But if they don't find a buyer, they can just let the option expire, and the seller will not feel as if you broke a promise to them. So therefore, my recommendation is that if you have no plans of actually buying these properties, if what you want to do is just basically put them on a contract or get an option on it, find another buyer, pass the property on to that person right away, then what you want to do is you might want to use an option. And I'll explain to you, we'll walk through the documents right now, their pros and cons in a little bit more on the other side. Just want to make those distinctions right now because they're very, very crucial distinctions on that end. All right, so having said that, you can use either one of them. You can go about them in either way you want. Both are great documents, and let's talk about them in detail right now. So we're going to talk about contracts versus options and which one is better to use, which one to use when, and then we're going to actually go through those and evaluate them and check them out and go kind of line by line through them. Okay, contract. A contract is a document, is an agreement to buy and sell. Obviously, the seller sells, you buy, right? The buyers and the sellers agree to purchase or to sell on selling and buying a item, in this case a piece of real estate, for a certain price at a certain time period or at a certain date, and both sign the document, and again the price is mentioned and so on and so forth. So it's really clear. So a contract is a high level of promise to purchase. That's kind of the part. It's a commitment, even though you can back out of it. So the sale or purchase contract, therefore, that we're using is very short and sweet. You can back out anytime for any reason. It's one of the items on it. One of the criteria is that we actually have no space for an escrow deposit in our contract. The option, on the contrary, is a little bit different. So let me go back, though, and talk to the purchase agreement. The purchase agreement, in summary, is a document where the seller agrees to sell and the buyer agrees to buy. It's therefore a clear agreement between two parties that a transaction will happen. So it's a high level of promise that you make. And yes, you can back out of it, but at the same time, the seller counts with you purchasing that property. So it's a higher level of commitment because you basically extended your virtual hand, your legal hand, shook the seller's hand and says, I will buy this property within 60, 90, or even 180 days at a certain price. And the seller now goes and opens a bottle of champagne at home and is celebrating that he finally gets rid of the burden of property ownership, that he no longer of a property that he no longer wants. That's the understanding of it. Now the contract that we're using is very short. It's very sweet. As a matter of fact, it's a one-pager. Let me actually bring it up right now. Here it is. I'm going to show you very quickly how it looks. Again, the yellow part is part that you need to edit when you get it, and then you need to unhighlight it. The way you unhighlight it is you cover it, and then you go to the highlight area and you say no color, right? And then the color disappears on it. Now I'm going to leave it in yellow right now because I want you to be able to see what the fields are that you need to change. We're going to talk to that through a middle. We're going to talk through it in a little bit through this contract. So here's the pieces that you want to cover on this, and then that's it. It ends already. It only has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 provisions and signature lines. That's all you need to have a legal contract in the United States. So it's short and sweet, but it has a provision that I already want to show that says buyer retains the right to cancel sale agreement anytime for any reason. You see this? Right there, putting in red. Buyer retains. Now, obviously, you don't want to keep it in red. You don't want to alert the seller to that, but you want to keep it in there. And this is an agreement that I have had in this contract for years. And it actually works just fine. And no seller complains about it. And they'll just accept it. So, therefore, again, and also if you look at it, there's no escrow deposit anywhere here. There's no space for an escrow deposit in this entire contract. As a result, you will not have to put down any dollars as an escrow deposit.
And at the same time, you can back out of a contract anytime for any reason. When you therefore send out these sale agreements, which is also the offer, right? This is the offer that you send out. With the offer, you send out a sale agreement. And if you use letter 2, this is the document that you include with the letter right away. So therefore, you can back out anytime for any reason. And there's no escrow deposit. As a result, how many offers can you make? As many as you want. Thousands, tens of thousands you can make, because you will never be forced to buy something you don't want to buy. I hope you really got this very clear. Now the option, let's talk about the option. The option is actually very similar, but it's a different kind of instrument. Here's the deal with the option. The option is a right. Very different. It's a right to purchase for you. When you give somebody an option, or when you get from somebody an option, if you send the seller an option, then you're asking the seller to give you the right to purchase this property. But the seller, therefore, the seller has the obligation to sell. So the option is a right to buy, but not the obligation to purchase for you. And it is the obligation to sell for the seller. So as a result, the option is a more one-sided document. It's a document that gives you a bunch of rights, like mainly the right to buy the property, but you don't have to buy the property. If the option expires, means if the time period that you agreed with the seller for that option expires, the option goes poof, disappears, dissolves, and nobody owes anyone anything. At the same time, if during that option period, you want to buy the property, the seller has the obligation to sell to you. The seller will have to sell to you. So therefore, since it's a more one-sided document, you have to pay a small price usually to get the seller to agree to sign that option, because basically you're locking up the property without having the legal obligation to actually buy it. Puts you in a really, really good position. So now that price for the option is called option consideration. The good news about it is, because we are dealing with people who no longer want their properties, we don't have to pay them a whole lot, because they don't really care if they make a bunch of money or not. They just want to get rid of the property. So often, therefore, $10 option consideration is enough. And you should send it to them, because by law, if you don't send it to them, the option is not enforceable. So you should send it to them. Now, I know many of my students that use the option, they don't even send the option consideration to the seller, and it worked for them because, again, the sellers don't care about the $10. The sellers don't care about all of this. They just want to get rid of the property. But legally, and actually morally also, you should be sending them whatever option consideration you agree to by mail, in the mail. So, as a matter of fact, one of the very, 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 very first deals that we have done using an option. Now, here's a quick explanation of exclusive versus non-exclusive option. So here's the thing. An option, you understand what it is right now. An option is the right that you have. If the seller gives you an option, the seller gives you the right to buy the property within a certain time period, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, as long as you want to make it. And within that time period, you have the right to buy the property at a specific price, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, $100,000, whatever you agree in that document. From you have the right to buy the property from the seller in that time period. And if it's an exclusive option, then only you can buy that property in that time period, and the seller cannot sell it to anyone else in that time period. You are the only one that can buy that property in that time period. So you essentially locked down the property. The seller's hands are tied. The seller cannot sell the property to anyone else, because you got the exclusive option for that property. So that's a powerful, powerful position. Because it's a powerful position, you usually have to pay a higher option consideration for a exclusive option, because you lock it down so severely. Now, non-exclusive option is basically the same thing, only that the seller can sell the property to anyone during the option time period, but if you come to the seller within that time period and say like, hey, I want to finally go and execute my option and I want to buy the property. And if the seller during that time period has not yet sold the property to somebody else, has not yet entered a contract with somebody else, in that case, the seller actually has to sell to you. So you know the difference. In one case, he cannot market it, he cannot sell it to anyone else in the exclusive way. In the non-exclusive, the seller can market the property, the seller can sell it to somebody else, but if he hasn't sold it to anyone else, if he hasn't put it under contract with anyone else, then when you want to go to him and go exercise that option, then he has to sell to you. So in either case, there's going to be an option consideration, but usually not a very high option consideration because number one of the kind of properties and the kind of people we deal with, these are people, they just want to get rid of their properties, as I've said multiple times already, and they don't want to maximize the profits on it. They just want to get rid of it. They don't care about option consideration, things like that. So in either case, usually a $10 option consideration is plenty. Now, as I said, one of the very, very first deals we've ever done was done with an option. And that was a story where we basically found a lady that had a property that we thought was worth about, we didn't know what it was worth, but we thought it was worth at least, let's say, $150,000. She wanted $100,000 for it. And after negotiating a little bit, we put it under an option for $70,000. Now, why didn't we just put it under an option? Why did we put it under an option? It's the same reason that a lot of my students are using options. Number one, I didn't have $70,000 at that time point. It was very, very beginning, one of probably the first four properties we ever bought. We didn't have an option. We didn't have $70,000. So I did not want to promise her that I would buy the property for $70,000. Instead, I told her the truth. I told her, you know what? If I can get an option from you for $70,000, I can either find the money to buy it, or I can find somebody that is willing to buy the property from me at a little bit higher price. And in that case, I can buy the property from you and then go sell it right away to the next guy. And she said, okay, that's fine. I don't care what you do with it as long as I get $70,000 for it, as we had negotiated. So I went to a very honest approach, very straightforward approach, and the lady agreed. So then I went to her and I said, like, okay, why don't we do an exclusive option? Now, she was savvy. And she's like, okay, well, an exclusive option, I need to ask you for a bunch of money. Typically, with a savvy seller, in an exclusive option scenario, you have to pay approximately 5% of the property value as an option consideration. So in that scenario, I would have had to pay her something like $3,500 to lock down this property for 90 days. Now, I didn't want to pay $3,500, and on top of it, that's about all the money I had right now because I had just bought a few properties, sold a couple, but all the money went back into buying more properties. So I had I was very cash poor at that moment. So I said, okay, then how about we instead do this, I told the seller, as a non-exclusive option. As a non-exclusive option, I explained to her what it meant, and literally, I had just learned it a week ago on some kind of a website somewhere back in 2000, early 2003. I literally just learned that, and I had no idea what I was really talking about. I was just basically bluffing it and pretending that I knew my stuff. So I went and I said, like, well, as far as I understand, the non-exclusive option doesn't lock you down. You can still sell to anyone else out there. So in that case, how about we do a non-exclusive option, which really doesn't restrict you at all, Mrs. Seller, because you can sell to anyone while I go and see if I can find the money or I find the buyer. So therefore, if we do a non-exclusive option, how about $50 for the option consideration? And she said, you know what, that sounds good. So I pulled up an option that I had downloaded from the internet somewhere, and I basically put it together, had her sign it, we put in $50, we put it in a time period, 90 days, and off I went to the races. Off I went to go try to find a buyer for it. So in that case, this property was in Northern California, just about an hour north of San Francisco in the Redwoods. Was really a pretty property, and what we did, 16 acres on a hill with a couple of building spots on there, with nice beautiful redwoods around it. And so what we did is we did analysis, and we figured the property would probably be worth $150,000. Now I know, with what I know now, that probably it was worth like $250,000 or $300,000. It doesn't matter. I didn't know back then. I figured 150. I figured perhaps we can list it for $100,000. So we listed it. Actually, we put an ad in the newspaper, in the San Francisco biggest newspaper, and on Sunday, and several people called us. They went up there, they did all their tests and all their checks and so on, and then a bidding war ensued, and 2 people bid this property up to $105,000, so $35,000 above what we had had it on the option. So immediately I did the following. I went and I actually exercised the option, because here's the thing that I want to talk about right now. An option is just the right to buy the property. In order to be able to actually close on the deal and buy the property, you need to still exercise that option, right? You need to exercise the option. And in order to exercise the option, you need to go back to the seller, tell the seller, hey, I want to now exercise the option. Well, what you do then is basically you have him sign a contract, a sale agreement between the seller and you. So the same document we talked about at the beginning of this session. That now you turn it from a promise and from a right to purchase that was not a promise into an actual handshake, written handshake, or a deal, written deal with a contract, which is a legal handshake, basically, where you say, yes, Mr. Seller, I'm going to buy this property by that date for that amount, and so on. So we turned it into we basically had her sign the contract for $70,000 for $1,000 escrow deposit at that moment or so. So I came up with $1,000. I gave it to her, and then, or actually gave it to the title company. But at the same time, what had also happened is I had a sale agreement for me to sell the property in my hand from one of the buyers for $105,000, signed by him with a $5,000 escrow deposit. So what I did is I basically went and I first had made sure that I can actually sell the property, that I can actually buy the property from the seller. So I converted my option into a sale agreement. And then I signed that one, and then I signed the one where I'm actually selling the property. So, and then both of these contracts I then gave to the title company, and the title company did what's called a double escrow or double closing, where they used the $105,000 from the buyer to go pay $70,000 of that to the seller, and keep a couple $3,000 for like taxes and for their own services, and give me over $32,000 in that deal. We were so excited by that deal, because that was by far the largest deal we had done to that moment. It was one of our first 5 deals, was a $30,000 deal. And here's the thing, that's what we did. We just followed exactly what you're learning right now. We first gave him an option. Then, in order to exercise the option, in order to be able to close the deal, we went there. So we went there back and then had her sign a contract or a sale agreement. It's the same thing. And then we passed it on to the title company, and they then did their rest. So the key that you got to understand is that a title company cannot close on an option. They can only close on a contract. So the option is a tool to lock down the property. But once you want to actually go to the next step to actually purchase the property, you got to get it under contract. You got to go on the option gives you the right to get that contract in place with the seller. So I hope you understand that. I hope that's very clear. Now, when we get these deals done, when we get a property under contract, we usually in the land area do something unusual. We do something unusual. In the normal real estate area, let's say if somebody wants to sell a house, if you want to sell a house, and that house, let's say your house is worth $200,000, and when somebody offers you $200,000 for it, how much money are you going to net on that deal? Even if it's free and clear, do you know? And the answer is typically you don't, because after paying realtor fees, after paying the title insurance cost, and after paying any kind of other miscellaneous fees, you don't know. You're certainly not going to receive $200,000. You're going to receive something like minus 6%. 6% in realtor commission is what? 6 times 2 is 12,000. So it's 188. That's the maximum you probably receive. But minus closing fees and other things, you might only receive $184,000. So you sold that property for $200,000, but after subtracting everything, you might end up only getting 184. But you didn't know because you didn't know how much it would be because typical real estate transactions are not being done by net to seller. It's very simple why they're not being done like that, because nobody knows what you owe on the property. If you have a $200,000 property and you have a $180,000 mortgage on it, then you're probably not going to net anything on that property. You might walk away with $2,000. So the buyer doesn't usually care about that. The buyer just looks at the property, what's it worth, what they're willing to offer, and they offer that amount to you. And then if you accept it, you get subtracted all kinds of liens and things that you owe, and then you get what's left over. Now in the land area, we wanted to turn it around. So what we're doing is, instead of offering it gross, basically, as most people do, we're offering net to the seller. What that means is that we are offering the seller $531.43. And that's exactly the check amount that they will receive at the end. The reason why we do that is very simply, exactly that amount. If there's extra fees, liens, or anything like that, or even closing costs, you pay for them. That's the reason we want to do that. And the reason we do that is it gives the seller absolute security that he or she can count on a certain amount, and that makes it easier for them to accept it, and it makes it less likely that all of a sudden they're going to be upset. Because what if you offer somebody $10,000 for their property, and then at the end there's a $9,500 lien on it, and now their net is like $400 and something dollars? They're going to be like upset. They're going to be like, what are they talking about? You offered me 10 grand. It's like, no, it's 10 grand minus liens. But what if you tell them, listen, I'm going to offer you $400 and something dollars for that property, and on top of it, you let them know that there's $9,500 in back taxes is on there, that really out of your pocket will come $10,000. So you do tell them that ultimately you will pay $10,000, but you phrase it in a way, and that we do that in the offer cover letter. In the offer cover letter, we actually tell them, hey, Mr. Seller, after evaluating your property and checking it out, we're willing to offer you $10,000 minus the liens, meaning you're going to net $400 and something dollars on that property. If you're willing to accept, please sign the contract. Now at least they know that you're out 10 grand, but they're knowing that they get $37.53. That's the number that they're counting on. That's the number that they've perhaps been looking for. That's the number that they need to buy, the video camera, to buy the Christmas gifts for the kids, to buy the wedding dress for their daughter, to buy no matter what it is, right? So it gives the seller security that he can count on a certain amount. But remember, you therefore pay for everything on top. And now if that is a lot, you might have to go and actually renegotiate. If it's part of the title search, part of the closing process that we'll talk about in the next module, if part of that closing process comes out that they do owe an additional $10,000 something, well, it might kill the deal in this case, and you might have to step out. If you made an offer for $5,000 minus $1,000 in back taxes, $4,000, but now it comes out that there's an extra, and you tell the seller you get $4,000 net, or $4,137.43 net, right? Let's just say $4,000 net. And now it comes out that there's an extra $3,000 lien. Technically, you need to pay for that. But if that brings that property beyond the 25%, you will definitely want to go back to the seller, renegotiate, and basically say, hey, Mr. Seller, I know he offered you $4,000, but you didn't tell me that you had an extra XYZ in liens. So I have to subtract those, and I really can offer you only $1,000. I hope that's okay. Can we agree on that? Yes, okay. Let's sign another sale agreement. So here's the thing. So you'll have an updated agreement where you adjust that or an addendum or so on. So that's what we use for the net to seller. Net to seller works really well because it gives that seller the security that he or she can count on a certain amount. Now, when to use the net to seller? With letter number 1, based on the seller conversation. If it is a simple deal, the seller tells you, I've owned this property for 40 years. I don't owe any back taxes on it. I don't have a mortgage on it. There's no other liens. There's no reason to not believe the seller on that. Most sellers tell the truth. Only occasionally do they try to trick you, and that'll come out in the title search anyway. So 95% of the cases, there's no reason to distrust them. So they tell you the truth. It's a simple deal, no mortgages, no liens. You're usually in safe territory by offering that deal. If the property has no back taxes and so on, that's a good place to offer the net to seller, because usually you don't have to go back to renegotiate. There's usually not additional surprises or anything like that. Now, when not to use the net to seller is with the letter 2, because you haven't done any research. You don't know if there's back taxes. You don't know if there's other liens. You haven't talked to the seller at all. You're just sending them a blind offer, and you don't know what all the stuff is that's being owed on it. So in that case, you need to then make them a gross offer, basically a offer of saying, like, I offer you $3,000 for the property minus any liens and other encumbrances and any kind of things like that. Very simple. Also, you can also don't want to use the net to seller if you know. And with letter 1, if you know that they're the neutral letter, if you know that there are items that could potentially be renegotiated. If you find out, if the seller tells you, oh yeah, I have some county like code violations on there. If I have some HOA liens on there. If you find out stuff like that before you make an offer, then you can totally renegotiate them. I literally had one lady, get that, a lady in Florida, gotten 2 properties. In this case, it wasn't land. It was a 4-plex and a duplex that were worth about $150,000, $200,000, but they had a $400,000 code violation against them. That basically means that these properties were worthless, right? Because they owed $4,000 in code violations, but they're only worth $150,000 to $200,000. By the way, that was the reason why that lady paid off, why the seller stopped paying the property taxes, because they're like, you know what? This is stuff, I owe all this money on it. I mean, I'm never going to be able to sell these properties. Plus, they didn't have the money to repair it. They would just get more and more code violations on it. So they just decided to stop paying property taxes on it. So what happened to my student, Trinette is her name, she actually got these 2 properties, the 4-plex and the duplex, for $50 a piece, because the seller just didn't want it anymore. But then she went to the city and she asked the city, hey, is there anything I can do to get rid of these code violations? Is there any way you would lower them? Because at $400,000, it really destroys the value of the property. Nobody's going to do anything to these properties to fix them up as long as you're not coming to more reasonable territory here with that property. And they looked at her and they said, like, okay, here's the deal. We are going to reduce these code violations if you promise us that you will go fix up the property within 60 days after you purchase it. If you do not fix it up within 60 days after you purchase it, we're going to slap the liens right back on, and we're going to add some additional liens on it. All right. So in the meantime, though, if you do that, if you repair the property within 60 days, what we're going to do, they told her, is we're going to reduce those code violation fees from $400,000 down to, drum roll, get this, $275. I'm not kidding. So she got a $399,750 reduction of these code violation liens just by promising to go fix it. Now, the fix-up cost about $7,500 or perhaps $10,000 to get them all of the way. But man, she got for $100. Plus, there was back taxes of $7,500. So basically, perhaps she spent $15,000 to $20,000 total. And for $15,000 to $20,000, she now has 6 apartment units, a 4-plex and a duplex, that she can rent for literally just a few, that she can rent for hundreds of dollars a piece. All right, so that's what we want to talk about here. And this is what happens when you actually do that. Here's a case study from Seth Beals from Michigan. He says, with your formula, I literally started making thousands of dollars within the first month. Now get that, right? I've been working the system for less than a year, and I've already had several transactions that made me the equivalent of $900 per hour. Sure beats the day job. Of course, this is a gift. your course is a gift, Jack, for anyone who is lucky enough to get their hands on it. My opinion, no amount of money can amount to what this information is actually worth. Financial freedom is priceless, and that's exactly what you're giving people with this system. The opportunity to achieve financial freedom and live life on their own terms. Seth Beal, Michigan. Now, that's not the only deal he's done. Actually, later on, he sent me another deal that he got in the deal, and by now he's long quit his job and so on. But one of the things he's done is he's actually found a deal that he bought for $3,700, and that has lakefront access to Lake Michigan in a really good area, worth up to $1 million. Now, if you get a deal for it that's worth $1 million for $3,700, how much money can you make on that? I mean, how many deals like that do you need to change your life? That's the power of the system here that you are experiencing right now. All right, so continuing on here, that's pretty cool. So continuing on, let's look at our contract and our options right now. Again, the sale agreement you had already seen. Very simply, it has a date, it has the name of the seller, it has your name and your address. Then it says the seller and the buyer agree to sell and buy it on the terms and conditions specified below. The property is situated in the county and state as described as. You put in the parcel number, you put in the legal description, then you put in the net to seller amount, right? If you want to do the net to seller. If you don't do the net to seller, very important, you got to take this word out, right? If you don't say it, then take this word out, which changes the entire contract. Payable to buyer in U.S. funds. All funds must pay the closing, must be paid by cashier check. You can change that and say, or wire transfer. As a matter of fact, when you get this, open is in your file, this is going to be updated right there. So buyer will pay cash for the property with no financing contingency. So you're basically telling him, I'm not going to go get a bank loan for this property. There's no financing contingency. Now, if that scares you, wait, just one extra paragraph. Then it says, this contract will be closed and the deed and possession will be delivered on or before. This is the close of escrow date. Now, what I said here is a message to you, right? And what I say here is the message is, insert a date between 90 and 180 days from now. Literally, you want to give yourself at least 60 or 90 days for multiple reasons, but also possibly as much as 180 days. So doesn't mean you don't have to buy that property next week. You can give yourself 3 months or even 6 months. I even have students that now use 360 days and basically get the property under contract for a full year before they actually have to go buy it. Now, why do they do that like that? They do that because, number one, you want to build them some buffer time just for the regular stuff. If there's a cloud on the title, if they need to track down somebody and they get a deed from a relative or so, stuff like that takes time, and the title company wants to have a little extra time. Number two, though, is the moment that you have this document signed from the seller, you're going to start marketing that property. You're going to start putting that property on the market, on the websites out there and so on, in a way that is legal, that we'll talk about in the next module. And you want to make sure you do that, and you want to make sure you have enough time to market it, right? What if you get 25 properties accepted in the next 2 months? You might not be able to market them all right away, and you're going to be flooded by deals, and you might sell the first 10 in the first 30 days, or the first 5 in the first 30 days, the next one in the next 30 days, the next one in the next 30 days. You might need 4 months to sell them all, not because they don't sell, but because it's going to take you a little bit to put them up on the website and market them and work with the people and so on, because you probably still have a job when you do this, right? You're probably doing this part-time. So therefore, you want to give yourself some time to be able to market these properties without having to actually dip in your pocket and actually purchase the property. That's one of the cool things that allows you to actually make money without spending much money. The only money you spend is on the systems and on the marketing. You do not have, if you tell the seller that you're going to give him $30,000 on that deal, and you don't even have to have $30,000, because if you say that you have 180 days to actually to close on that property, that means you got yourself this property locked down for a half a year, and you can market it for half a year. And if within that half a year, ideally you should be finding somebody within 30, 45 days. If you find somebody within 30, 45 days, you then do a double escrow or an assignment and sell the property without ever having to come out with money out of your own pocket to buy the property yourself. So put in a date between 90 and 180 days, and then it says so unless extended by the provisions, failure of this to close of this set date will render this contract null and void and unenforceable. Now comes this key sentence again that I showed you earlier already. The buyer, meaning you, retains the right to cancel the sale agreement any time for any reason. That means that even though you put no financing contingency in there, you can back out of the contract anytime for any reason, which gives you the security that you will never have to buy a property without having to worry about money, or without having to buy a property. Like you never will have to buy a property that you don't want to buy. So then again, closing procedures, buyer will pay all costs of escrow, taxes, recording fees, and title insurance policy. So that means you are covering everything above that net to the seller. And then you say the sale is closed by, insert the name of a title company, or if closing is without the title company, say a notary public. Obviously, this is the stuff that you need to adjust. That's why it's in yellow. Then title, it says title will convey marketable seller, marketable title to the property, and so on and so forth. The only thing you want to change here, if you don't do the net to seller, then you want to change here, take out that you want to pay for the taxes. That's the only other thing you want to change there, right? So very simply, just a couple of things. If you want, you can make a copy of this document and just make those adjustments, and then you have one net for seller, one not net for seller. I don't want to confuse my students. Most of the times I do the net for seller, that net to seller. That's why I only have one version of the contract in there. And then title, seller will convey marketable title to the property versus statutory warranty deed, or whatever it's called, basically whatever is appropriate to the seller's status, being free or clear of liens and encumbrances of record except for unpaid taxes again. And again, if you don't do the net to seller, you eliminate that little piece here. All right, got it? So what does it mean is that if the person has died that owned the property and you're dealing with a personal representative, well, then you're going to get a personal representative's deed. If the property is held in a trust, then you're going to get a trustee deed. If the company is owned by a normal person and free and clear, then you get a warranty deed. Or in some cases, the deeds are called grant deeds. And if it's a minor that owns the property, well, then you might get a guardian deed because the minor can't sign for themselves. So basically, it's a few examples of what kind of deeds you can get. And that's why you hire a title company to actually do this for you, because they will know what kind of deed to use. Then number 7, offer and acceptance. How long is the offer valid? You don't want to just make offers and have them be eternally valid. If you were to put unlimited offers out there in the year 2006, when the market was an all-time high, then in the year 2008 or 9, anyone who would have kept that offer at home, and if it would have not had an expiration date, would have accepted those offers in droves. As a matter of fact, that actually happened to us quite a bit, that all of a sudden in 2009, 10, we got phone calls from people that say like, hey, you sent me an offer in 2006 for $10,000 on their property. Is that still valid? And the answer is a pretty obvious no, because that property was worth $50,000, $60,000, $50,000 in 2006. But then with the market crash, it was only worth perhaps $25,000 a few years later. So at $25,000, my maximum offer is going to be something like $5,000 or $6,000, not 10 anymore. And so therefore, I would say no, absolutely not. I cannot honor this $10,000 offer anymore, because that was back then. But if you would like, I can make you a new offer right now. And then I went back to them and made them a $5,000 offer. Guess what? Some accepted, some didn't. But bottom line is, you do want to have an expiration date on the offer so that there's also a little urgency for them to accept it. Otherwise, it's going to float out there forever and be valid kind of forever. So therefore, what you want to do, if you send the offer out by mail, which I still do it to this day, I send out the offers by mail because I want them to see it, not have to have any kind of hassle. If they don't have the printer close by, if they're an older gentleman or older couple that don't even have a computer or printer, I don't want to send it by email if they don't have an email address. I don't want to send it by email if they have trouble printing it out. I don't want to put any hurdle into their way that would prevent them from being able to sign that sale agreement and send it back to me. Therefore, I always send the sale agreements in writing, per mail, and since the United States is a big country, it does take 3-4 days from one side of the country to the other side of the country. So it does take a while to get this delivered. So therefore, I'm going to be kind to people, and I'm not just going to put a 3 or 4 day expiration date on there. I'm going to put a 7-day expiration on there. And that means that if I send it out on day 1, it's going to get there on day 4, the latest. And now it gives them another 3 days to talk it over with their kids, talk it over with their spouse, think it over themselves, and then make their decision. At which point, even if they were upset at the first moment that I offered them not enough, they would then go and say, you know what the heck, let's just accept it because it's too much hassle for me to go sell it myself. And in that moment, they accept it, and they still have a day or so to go. They accept it, they send it back, because it doesn't have to be, as it says there, this offer may only be accepted by seller in writing if postmarked or faxed by above date. So that's the key here. So they have the full day, the full 7 days to send it back. And then it might take another 3-4 days to get back to me. But as long as it's signed and postmarked within those 7 days, I will accept it. Here's a little secret. Even if they sign it on the 8th day or so, and they send it over, or they sign it and date it such that it looks like it's on the 8th or 9th day and send it over, guess what? I will still accept it. I will still accept it because, hey, I wanted deals, right? I want more deals. So therefore, I didn't go through all this work to then not accept the deal just because it came 2 days late. Or if they sign it on the 7th day, but then they send it over and it takes another week to get there, of course I'll still accept it, even though if it doesn't have postmarked. If it postmarked 2 weeks later and so on, of course I'm going to still accept it because I want that deal. Otherwise, I would have not made the offer. And then at the bottom, there's signature, and that's it. And as always, there's the disclaimer, and you want to remove that disclaimer. All right, so now let's look at the other one. Let's look at the option. Here's the option agreements. It's the same exact thing. Oh, as a matter of fact, it almost looks like the same document, doesn't it? Because it's a variation of the sale agreement, only adjusted such that it's an option. An option, again, an option has a date that you set it up. Has the seller, or in this case, the seller is called the optioner, or the optioneer also. So the option with an ER always means it's the one that gives in legal language. So it's the seller, the optioner, put in the seller name, and then the buyer or the optionee is the one that receives the option. So the seller is the optioner, you're the optionee. So you put in your name in there, and here's the key. You always put in this in there. The same, by the way, with this up here, right? You put in always the words and or assigned, or asset or and or assignee, right? That's the thing that you want to put in there. So you always want to put those words in there because by having that in there, you will be able to assign that contract to somebody else. You will be able to assign that option to somebody else. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So here's the thing. So the option agreement, the seller name, optioner, optionees, your name, or anyone that you assign this document to, your street address, city, state, zip, and then you say which property is which county is the property in, which state is it in. Again, the parcel number, the legal description. Then it gets again agency disclosure. Is say if you are an agency disclosure, if you are a real estate broker, then you can actually put this. Then you should keep that. And if not, you should eliminate this paragraph right away because you might not be. If you're not a real estate broker, then get it out. If you're a real estate broker, a real estate agent, you want to disclose that right here in this moment. So next then is purchase price. You set a purchase price because remember the option is a right to buy the property at a certain price. So you set a strike price for the property. So the strike price, in this case, purchase price, is the same. We want to use words that the seller understand. So the seller might not understand the word strike price, but the seller will understand the purchase price. So in this case, again, you can say the purchase price is whatever it is, $5,000, right? And then you decide if you want to do the net to seller or not. So you want to eliminate that again because that's a template, of course. You can say net to seller or not net to seller. If you don't want to do the net to seller, eliminate it. So then here it says the seller of the above specified property hereby gives the buyer of the property an 180 day. Now that's a time that you put in there, right? That's a time period that you put in there. You can pick a different time period. You can put 90 days, 120 days, 150 days, 280 days, 360 days. You can put 5 years, whatever you want in there. But typically 180 days is absolutely normal. You can do as much as that very simply, very little pushback from the sellers. And then I would go out there with an exclusive option to purchase the property. Now, here's why. Go in with an exclusive option. If they say no, you can always resend them a document that says for a non-exclusive option. But if they say yes to an exclusive option, you got that baby locked down. You got that property locked down. They cannot sell it to anyone anymore. That's an important piece. Right? So then the option consideration, how much do you pay for that? Right? $10. $10 is enough. Just $10 in exchange for obtaining the right to purchase the property for the specific time period. This time period, right? Period at the above specified sale price, this sales price. The buyer optionee pays seller optioner a non-refundable option consideration of, again, $10. Right? And some students use $1. $1. I use 10. It's a nicer number. Then here you go. Option expiration. If accepted within a specific time period, this option agreement will be expired. If not accepted, actually, there's a typo here. If not accepted within the specified time period, this option agreement will be expiring on whatever the day you want to put in there. Actually, on July 30th, 2017, whatever the number is, 18, 19, whatever is 6 months from now. So you're going to take today's date and you're going to go 6 months forward. And then it says, unless the buyer optionee exercises his option to purchase the said property at the agreed upon price set forward this agreement, basically prior to that. Then the closing procedure and so on and so forth. It says it has a few of these provisions. And again, you don't want to put out an option offer, an option agreement that is valid forever. You want to give the seller, the optioner, only a few days for it. So you can give the optioner, again, a few days. In this case, I don't know, if today is January 5th, 2017 at 5 p.m., you basically say that, or if it's like end of December when you did it, you add up 7 to 10 days again, just like in the other one, and you put that on there. Now, this is the date that you will enter in here. So this is the date, about 7 to 10 days from today, right? So this is what you put in there, and I hope you don't mind if I'm making edits right here, because it's a great opportunity to change this document right there and making sure that you see how easy it is to make these changes, right? So you put that in there and change that, and now you got the exact things that you want to do there. So the same in here will be expiring on date. You put in what you put in there is the date, 180 days from today, right? That's the date you want to put in there. Boom. Let me highlight that again one more time. Bold. And what I'll do is I'll put, again, these brackets around it. And you got it. Now, if you obviously change that back to an actual date, this is only done such that you can actually see how easy it is to edit this document from your site. Right? So now you got a document that you can take forever into the future. And then the rest is, then again, it's signing a few blah blah, the seller's name, the seller optioneur's name, your name. And then again, you remove the disclaimer once you're ready to actually send this out, and you are ready to go. All right? That's the document. It's as simple as that. Now, as homework for this program, very simply, You want to print out the contract and the option. You want to read them in detail. You want to check them out. If you find typos, fix them, right? But usually they should be good now. Fill out the form. Fill out the sample case where you pay, let's say, $5,000 for the property and the closing is in 5 months, or where you get an option to buy the property for $5,000 and you get the option for 5 months. That's what you want to do. Go through the motions. Save it as a copy. Download it from the resources, actually from the documents area right here in your members area. Bring it up, open it up, print it out, hand fill it out, print it out, fill it out on the computer. Make sure you have all the proper pieces for it. And again, if you have questions, go to jackboxsupport.com and ask us the question. And with that, we are concluding this module. Thank you very much.